It's fascinating, isn't it? It's fascinating that the imbalance in development comes up in both the states, between Mumbai and the rest of the states in Maharashtra, Hyderabad and the rest of the state in Andhra Pradesh. So could we, Professor Ganesh?
I have a question for Professor Palshikar and one for Professor Suri. The question for Professor Palshikar is that you very effectively, gave the context and the change which has taken place in Maharashtra, particularly in relation to Maratha dominance, the erosion of Maratha dominance. But we did not get a sense of what has filled that gap, which community has, come in place, or it's a combination of different formations. So if you could elaborate on that, that'll be helpful. And my question to Professor Suri, and this relates to what you said, but what we heard in the morning from the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh about the crisis. We heard things like the need for a new capital, the financial crisis, the different problems which the state is facing after bifurcation. I think, and then you highlighted in your presentation that how new states have been created in the last 50 years, and India has this tradition of creating new states, quite successfully in some ways. But this is, of course, the most recent example is not a good example of how to go about it. So it's perhaps the process of creating the state or bifurcating the state, which also needs to be examined critically. And in some ways, some of the problems which we face are arising from the very botched up manner in which it was done. So if perhaps you could talk about that.
Okay. Since I see a lot of hands, can we take just one more question and then we'll come back to it? Next round.
So I was thinking about how to frame the question. It was driven primarily by my lack of empirical knowledge. So it's a similar question about what other social bases of power are emerging. And so if you allow me very briefly, so the way I want to frame it is rather conceptual. So Telangana was also the site of the biggest peasant communist uprising in India right after partition. So what I want to get a sense of from both of the panelists is how do we think about what is the political world that people inhabit? I mean, what particular identity issue politicizes people at any one given point in time? Is it class? I mean, we're talking about identity primarily as far as I follow you. Why wouldn't we talk about class? Or how do we think conceptually about something like caste? So that table you had about Marathas, the rest of it was caste identities, when then one religious identity at the bottom there with Muslims. So I'm just trying to get a sense of how do we actually juxtapose these competing identities, some of them material, some of them not material, what's going on there. And then that related to that last issue you raised about, well, then ultimately all of these political parties, 4 of them I think you noted, actually they don't actually articulate policies that are very different from one another. Could that be because we've actually stopped thinking about class as an analytic category? I think it is, personally, because basically every party comes in and does the same thing. They say, okay, we need as many free and open markets as possible, and we need the government to simply just play an enabling role. So ultimately, they're not going to say anything different from one another. All they're going to say is, oh, I cater to this identity group versus you cater to that identity group. So I understand this is specifically a conference about federalism, which is why we might be focusing on this particular aspect. But in terms of the larger political world that we're trying to understand, I think conceptually we need to go a little bit deeper.
So maybe the panelists would like to take up these 2 questions before we move to the next. Would you like to take?
To the first question, what replaces? I guess we need to appreciate that when hegemony of a certain kind is lost and dominance is eroding, it's not easy that some neat formation sort of replaces it immediately. So I would say that Maharashtra is probably now going through a period when there is a lot of churning, If you want a short-term answer, for example, what has replaced Maratha domination is a tentative combination between the upper and the lower. That's something that we have already done, and it might interest you also to look at what I have written in the Indian Express on this. It's the combination of the upper castes and the other backward classes, as they are called, but they are castes, who have come together to replace Maratha dominance. Because given the numeric game that democratic politics sort of opens up, it's not easy that any one community or section of society would be able to replace or oust the Maratha dominance or Maratha community in the politics of the state. But in a sense that also connects up with this other question that you have been asking, which is that the kind of people who replace it also probably aim at constructing a similar hegemonic hold over the state apparatus that the earlier ones had. And that's why I ended up by saying that I don't see any opening up in terms of new policy initiatives, new ideas, or even new social formations. This question about class and caste is much more complicated, because there would be one argument, at least in the Indian context, that talking of caste is not very far from talking of class as well. I do not 100% subscribe to that view. I would say that these are analytically two different things, but empirically also there are possibilities of thinking of porousness of these categories. What happens, however, is that on the ground reality is that for competitive politics and contestations of material interests, it so happens that class doesn't appear in a neatly organized category of so-called material interests of the dominant sections and the non-dominant sections as such. Marathas, for example, of whom I talked at length, are quite deeply stratified along class lines. And that's something that I have been working with other colleagues currently on the stratification within the Maratha community, and whether the overall loss of power is because of that stratification getting further expanded. However, I must also say that ultimately those who control the state apparatus, whether it is the Congress party or the new ones that come to power, tend to be representatives of the dominant material interests. So that's really what I wanted to put across, that dominant material interest manages to protect itself either through this party or that party. In more, let's say, in more flexible terms, I put it as agricultural versus non-agricultural interests. But when I say that, it doesn't mean that the urban poor are getting any better deal than the agriculturists in the rural sector. So in a sense, it is the established interests, industrial interests and finance sector interests which dominate the politics of the state. That is why when politics gets expressed, it is mostly in terms of non-material interests. So it is expressed in terms of nativist interests, that we don't want outsiders in Maharashtra, for example, or it gets expressed in caste terms, that we don't like this particular caste because we belong to some other caste. So caste and regional identities typically masquerade the actual chasm that democratic politics really sort of tries to slide out or keep out. That would be my broad response to your question.
I think to Ganesh's question, probably there are all these aspects. But now, you see, after the division, the two state governments have introduced budgets which exceeded the total budgetary amount of the United Andhra Pradesh. When Andhra Pradesh budget exceeded 1 lakh crores, we all thought that where was the money coming from 8 years ago. And today, the Telangana had 1 lakh crore budget, Andhra also had a 1 lakh crore budget. I don't know where this money came within almost doubled. Even a small state like, not small, very small state, Telangana is the 8th or 9th biggest state in India now, which has 1 lakh crore budget. So presented, the budget session is going on in Hyderabad. And so I think they are able to, I don't know where the money is coming from. The economists should tell us that how states create so huge financial resources. But the chief ministers speak of financial crisis, financial crunch. But actual budgets, they have lots of money. But I think the basic reason for the division of Andhra Pradesh is a kind of competition between the elites of the two regions, where the Telangana elites felt that if in a separate state they would get a better opportunity to develop without any controls or reins or obstructions by the Andhra businessmen or entrepreneurs or so on and so forth. I think that was the competition that was there behind this. Of course, they presented in terms of finances, expenditure, backwardness, regionalism, and all that. On Dr. Akhtar's question, I think, my understanding is that identities are many and they are not fixed. So, identities based on religion, on caste, on region, on language, they all exist at the same time. They're all in me. It's not that I define myself by only one identity. I am a Muslim, I am a Telangana person, I am this caste or Hindu this caste, speaking this language. So these multiple identities exist in every human being. The only question is which identity is privileged, which is brought forward at a given point of time. And there is tremendous amount, and also if just because one identity comes to the fore at a given point of time, it will be there at the fore always. These are like birds flying. You know, the lead bird comes back and then another bird takes the lead. So in the identities flying, some identity moves forward and then recedes to the background later. It doesn't go away. It's there somewhere at the back of my mind. But then I push it backwards and something else comes. This happens all over the world. The way Catholics and Protestants fought in Europe, they killed each other. It happened among the communists. The same communists who fought for communism in Czechoslovakia, they fought against each other on the basis of nationality, regional identities. Or Yugoslavia, they killed each other. Serbia, what happened in Serbia, and I never thought that in a former socialist state of Yugoslavia, people will be butchered like worms and birds, like the way it happened in Bosnia and Serbia, in the heart of Europe. Europeans may tell me about civilization, tolerance, freedoms, etc. They were killing each other last century. Lakhs of people were killed, with Jews and Christians, Muslims and Christians. Whatever, communist, non-communist, British versus French. Within their own countries, they were killing each other. So all the things, these identities are not fixed and fluid. In Andhra Pradesh, people fought for a united state. Hundreds of people died for a unified state. Hundreds of people killed each other for a separate state in 1969-71. When N.T. Ramarao started his Telugu Desam, he rode to power on a slogan called Telugu Pride. Telangana people voted overwhelmingly. The Telangana people who fought for a separate state few years before now vote for N.T. Ramarao, who completely negates the division of Andhra Pradesh, gives the slogan of Telugu Pride, and Telangana people welcomed him with great enthusiasm. And after 10 years, again the state gets bifurcated. So how leaders can articulate this? Identities are not pre-given. Identities are there, always has the potential to be activated. And what identity gets activated at what point of time also depends the kind of leadership that is available. And the leadership also makes judgments on the possibilities, and it works on that possibility, activating that particular identity. And when several identities come together, it becomes powerful. When religion, language, region, and maybe class sometimes, if they are all, as identities have additive power. One identity has one power. If you add two identities, then they become more powerful. Three become much more powerful. And I think in Telangana, several identities were brought together, and they transcended the identity of religion, of language.
Fascinating discussion. It reminded me of what Heraclitus had said of the river, that you'd never step into the same river twice. and much as what has happened, the changes are like how he described the state of flux. I myself, for instance, lived in three what we call countries. I was born just before partition in Assam, which is British India. I was an administrator for Pakistan, in fact, in Assam, Akhtar's district, Abbottabad in Frontier province. I was a diplomat for Bangladesh, and like all good South Asians, I finally came to Singapore to be a scholar. My question is, what is developments in India in terms of all these changing states? Would it have a contribution to the theory of sovereignty? Does India, what's happening in India, the developments in India, contributing to an evolution of a new kind of theory of sovereignty in politics?
Thanks for excellent presentations. Just one point, and basically trying to radicalize both your arguments a little bit. And the radicalization would take the following form, right? So this time what was distinct about the struggle over Telangana was that the struggle over Telangana was really about who gets control of Hyderabad. And one of the reasons you don't get a powerful movement in Vidarbha, because you know that if Vidarbha succeeds, Vidarbha politicians will not get control over Mumbai. UP needs to be bifurcated, but you will not get a movement because there isn't a big political cash cow over which political forces are going to mobilize and fight, right? So there is actually a political economy dynamic to which states will actually see a kind of movement for subsecession in different forms. But the radical proposition is this. I agree with the proposition. Obviously, class plays a huge role in politics. But often the way we use class is almost tautological. Tautological in the sense that whichever comes out to be the dominant interest, we say the political system has served its interest. What's interesting in both your cases is that class is being created through access to political power. There isn't a pre-given conception of class against which you can actually match, okay, political power is serving the interest of this class. If you just did an analysis, right, of the new legislators, right, Andhra was the pioneer in this, where if you like, an entrepreneurial class was actually created through politics rather than actually pre-existing and being, pre-given. If you look at the origins of all new businesses in Andhra, regional capitalism in Maharashtra. So the question is, in a sense, right, if that is the case, I mean, do we need a different conceptualization of the relationship between class and politics than the standard one where we take class categories as given and they think politics maps onto that?
Three quick
Take
questions.
this as the last question. Yeah.
To the professor from Maharashtra. Isn't it very simple financial engineering? If you have a bulk shareholders of 30% controlling and the Amit Shah model of re-engineering the remaining 70% to come together, then electoral politics will change. Obviously, this is the beginning of end of dominant of a below majority, but one single large community in any state. Maharashtra is facing the last of the three. Not only Marathas, you look at every other one, like the Reddy domination declining in the divided state of Andhra Pradesh. It is going to happen in every state when the remaining social engineering of the other majority members are brought together under one platform. They obviously will capture the power. With reference to Mr. Suri, is it not a fact that over centralization of development of Hyderabad actually contributed for the division? Because the fact of the matter is, when you over-depend on one city for the 60% of the economy of the state, obviously regional aspirations will come, whether it is Vidarbha or any other state. And last question for the chair, sir, don't you think that too much centralization of bureaucracy in Delhi has led to these regional imbalances, and political unemployment and retired official unemployment is being the provocating factors for these slogans on regionalism and separatism?
I would say that yes, Maharashtra's politics of the first 20-25 years actually shows how politics can create a class of entrepreneurs, as one might call it, in rural Maharashtra, the entire edifice of the cooperative structure. Somewhere down the line in the 80s, however, I thought and I think there are others who have also been saying this, that this initiative of politics ceases to exist. And the industrial interests of mainly Mumbai, Pune, Thane belt sort of take over politics and start dictating terms on political decision making. It's both also, of course, possible that the initiative of politics loses its momentum because of the quality of politics in the 80s, but it's not so much really only on the quality of the political elite that one has to bank upon, but also the structural elements. And so what I was trying to say is that there are certain structural elements in the politics of Maharashtra which have now produced a certain moment in the politics of Maharashtra as we witness it for the last maybe 10-20 years, and the rise of BJP to power in a sense symbolizes that change which was happening through the 90s, both in terms of the social structures and in terms of the economy of the state. But I agree that there shouldn't be a kind of one-to-one conceptualization of class to politics or imposition of the class mapping on politics. So I would agree to that formulation. This other question about the success of the BJP, BJP currently seems to have a certain strategy about which 10 years ago also some of us had written with the title BJP's New Social Bloc, wherein the BJP tries to bring together two sections of the society, the upper and the lower middle in terms of the caste hierarchy, to ease out the middle peasantry castes wherever possible. I don't know whether political parties actually have so well-defined strategies. These are, in a sense, the outsiders' observations about what political parties do. I'm sure also that doing this would be detrimental to the BJP in many states of India. They would not do it in all states of India. They would do it selectively. Number three, the larger game plan of the BJP being to penetrate most sections of the caste Hindu society, they would not ease out the middle peasantry caste so easily. It so happens, as I showed you, that in Maharashtra also, the BJP is not trying to necessarily neutralize the dominant community, but only to temporarily push them aside. If you ask me, I would say that in next 10 years, the BJP would have become a party of the Marathas. Not because of the BJP's design, but because Marathas, their interests, the interests of the Maratha political elite cannot be served unless they join the bandwagon of the winning party. So I'm pretty sure that very soon, why 10 years, maybe in the next 1 or 2 years, you would get news how various sections of the Maratha elite have bought their peace with the BJP. And one of them, the NCP, already having extended uninvited support to the BJP is quite indicative of that.
I think in India, I don't know whether he is here, I don't see him here. Yes, yes, sir. Okay. I think it is not sovereignty, I think, that is relevant. It is a suzerainty. The concept of suzerainty is understood as sovereignty in India, historically, I think. Because the emperor, the Sarvabhauma or the Chakravarti, was never the one who ruled the entire people in the territory. He was the one who controlled the satraps. And the satraps, historically speaking, became assertive and bold when the central authority became weak. And when the central authority became strong, they paid tribute to the sovereign, and the sovereign left the territorial king to rule whatever way he or she liked. So it is a kind of an emperor, a sovereign, presiding over a large number of provincial kings. That was the moral, and leaving the tribals for their own tribal councils, tribal chieftains. So that was the way India was ruled for ages. And we never had the kind of sovereign which a Bodan or Hobbes speak of, a creation of a sovereign through a social contract. And I think sovereignty today, even after independence, in the last 50 years, the biggest question that challenges the nation or the country of India, I would say, is this: to have a strong center or to have a strong state. The whole question of sharing sovereign power between a central state and the provincial state had been at the heart of Indian politics. You call it federalization, you call it provincialization of politics, you call it regional parties emerging. It was or it was left versus others. The communists existed in Bengal because of their fight with the center, constant fight with the center. And even today, there are several leaders at the state level who are very aggressive towards the center. It could be Mamata Banerjee, or it could be Jayalalitha, or it could be somebody else tomorrow. There is a constant kind of a anxiety or unease or tension between the central sovereign power and the state sovereign, the extent of which the states can share the sovereignty of the, whenever the balance goes the other way, it causes a problem. If too strong a state would undermine the state in the central state, would undermine the states at the provincial level. Two strong states would weaken the central state. And I think that's what happened in the previously, at least in the last 4 or 5 years. We had a weak leadership at the center, and now there is a backlash. A strong leader now emerges at the center. And the states appear, for the time being, undermined. And the power balance shifts to the center now. Probably after 10 years, we don't know. The states may assert again if a weak leadership comes there. So I think I agree with you that the point I'm thinking is India can contribute to the theory of sovereignty in the sense that there has to be in a federation of Indian type. I can think of only European Union emerging as one single state. Then I can think there can be parallel to India. But in a federated state like India, there has to be a fine balance between center and state in terms of sharing the sovereign power of the state. I think on class, I think, yes, I think these are the two reasons. The access to political power has become so crucial to promote business interests. And there is such a kind of what we call crony capitalism. I think that bred the Telangana demand to a great deal, because access to power has become so crucial. I think that is true of Southeast Asian nations also. The Southeast Asian industrialist class has developed because of access to the state. They were the clientele of the state. So it happens in all developing countries. Probably it is happening here. But what I think, Pratap, is there is a kind of again, a dialectical relationship between the class and the state. It's not that class creates the state. It's not that state creates the class, if you're using the word create. But I think a class uses the state, which is universal. But what happened in India in the last 10 years, I think, which led to the kind of a Telangana separatism, is unless you are a client of the state, you get the patronage from the state, you will never develop, because through public contracts and all that. I think that led to kind of great discontentment among the Telangana upcoming business classes. I think that's what the Hyderabad development reflects, that kind of a process where this kind of patronage of the state has become necessary to promote business interests and I think the symbiotic relationship between this kind of a crony capitalist or business classes who gain through access to political power is one basic reason for the Telangana agitation and then bifurcation.
Enormous amount of decentralization, particularly away from the center into the states, and that is going to, I think, play itself out in the next few years. And several reasons for this, I will not go into that.